Hi, I'm Dr. Arlen Myers. I'm President and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, and welcome to another episode of SOAP Video. This is the third of a series we're doing on medtech commercialization, and if you weren't able to view the other two while they were being produced, you can go to the SOAP Video YouTube channel and download them and watch the prior two episodes. So this third episode is about commercialization strategy and the exit. And once again, we're pleased to have as our guest Brian Doty, Brian, good to see you again.
Great to see you. How are you doing today, Dr. Myers?
Great. And again, thanks for all the information you're giving us and the prior two videos. So I wonder if you could sort of summarize what we've been learning over the past 2 weeks.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So here we are at the end of a 3-part series. It's been definitely a fun journey. I have a couple slides here to answer Dr. Myers' question. And the way we started off, let me switch the display. Tell me when it looks right to you.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so again, I'm Brian Doty. I came up through the ranks at Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson, and then I did 3 straight startups, and those all turned into exits. So we did 2 public companies and 1 that we sold to a larger strategic. And then starting in 2013, I put together this process that I do with clients that we've been talking about here in this series. So our first 2 topics for the first session was sort of the overview. You know, how do you go from literally you have an idea to the exit? And then we talked about the vetting. To me, it's the most important part of all of this is scoring out your clinical needs, scoring out your capabilities, and scoring out what the product actually has to do. And then what we did in the middle 2 is we talked about funding, sources of funding, what they're looking for, how they make decisions. And then we talked the 4th item about how do you get a product, an idea, actually developed, cleared, and ready for the market. So today we're going to talk about commercialization and then exiting. So we'll just jump right in. I want to give the highlights of a couple of these pieces because they're really important if you didn't see the other videos. The first one was the process overview. And here we are back at the beginning talking about benchmarking or scoring. Most critical piece, it provides the roadmap to where should you go for funding. It provides the roadmap to how should you develop it. Bricks and mortar, full-time people, or a incubator like we talked about, and we mentioned a couple great ones. And then second, you have to get investment. So we talked about the scoring points you to who's most likely to be interested in your project. And then the development and gain clearance, a lot of different ways to do that. And then of course, phase commercialization, which is the topic of today. So I just wanted to remind you that you can stop and rescore anytime. The way we score it is 217 scores, 217 items that matter so much that we need to know where do you stand with those. And this benchmarking really tries to pull risk forward. It tries to turn things that are subjective into objective measures. And we've been doing this for years and we validate it all the time. And unfortunately, the average score is about 2.9 out of 10. That's okay. It just shows you where you are. But this scoring is critical. Too many projects start without this type of scoring, and then they uncover problems as you go forward, and that doesn't serve anybody. So I just want to touch here on the sources of funding. We talked about how important it is to have some of your own money in there. You can go to friends and family, and there are many different sources. We talked about the pros and cons of each, and you can see that on video number 2. And then getting to your clearance, we talked about this spectrum. And the spectrum is all the way on the left of bricks and mortar, full service incubators, partial incubators, contractors, or developing it with your strategic that you're hoping ultimately acquires. So today, we're going to finish off this 3rd part of 3, talking about proving commercial value. So the word commercialization, I hear people talk about, well, we're good at commercialization or we are ready for commercialization. Let's first talk about what it is and have a common definition. First of all, we know that only 85% of ideas that become FDA cleared and are ready to go to market, only 85% exit without commercializing. So 15% get bought, 85% you have to commercialize. Well, why is that? And that's because the marketplace is the ultimate arbiter of the value. How much is your idea worth that you're hoping to take public or become purchased, etc. So it's the marketplace that rules. We can show numbers all day. We can show market size. We can do waterfalls of value. The market is the true arbiter. And so strategics know this. And we mentioned in a prior session that it used to be that the strategic would try to know what's being developed, what's coming from people that have ideas and are making these new products. What's coming, try to get in early and try to catch it right before, a positive clinical trial or before it even gets cleared. Well, that's completely different now. Now everybody will tell you straight up. I was talking to a very large strategic yesterday on a project, and we were talking about this very item. How do you decide what to buy and how do you value it? And they're like, well, how did it do in the market? i.e., how's the commercialization going? And the reason for that is because it takes away risk. And the reason it flipped from get it early to buy it when it's de-risked, the reason that happened is because strategic bought too many companies that did not do well once they were acquired. So it's real data that you get from commercialization, and the strategic needs it to say yes, no, and they need it to arrive at the value that they're going to place on your product. So this is the importance of commercialization. Now, to me, doing it right, there's only one way to do it, and it's to do it right. And whenever we look at a product that is going to be commercialized, I want to be involved up front when the person first had the idea, because I'm thinking right from day one, how will we commercialize this? Is it commercializable? If it is, what is it going to be? What's going to constitute my sales process? What am I going to say to that physician or that hospital executive to gain their attention, show credibility, and then be able to talk about how our product serves them? So I make a sales process, sales tools. We get the person that is good at working this process, manage the process, and then we have to have a CRM because I need to track the data, the sales data. I have to track that. And it's different than you might imagine. It's not just looking at the lagging revenue. But anyway, this is the process. So we asked the question, how much commercialization do I need to do to have a strategic say yes and give me a fair value? So how much is enough? Well, first off, not to be controversial, but if you're asking that, you failed at step one. Remember the scoring, the all-important scoring, 217 points? We already should have known this from the strategics. What are you looking for? So this strategic that I mentioned, I spoke to yesterday, I said, is it a magic revenue amount? No. Well, what is it? Here's what they're looking for. They want to know what was the time and the cost that it took to get to a doctor to say, yes, Brian, I'd like to try that. This is what I'm measuring in my CRM. What was the time and cost to get the doctor to say yes? What was the time and cost to get the hospital to agree and order it? And what was the time and cost involved in getting the reorder rate? And what is the reorder rate? Everyone's fearful that something comes out, shiny new penny, people try it, but they don't use it. Or it works in such a rare case that they're going to use it every time they see that rare case, but it doesn't happen very often. And so they're looking at the reorder rate and they're looking at what's the average selling price that you can maintain. So the only way to really answer these questions, sort of at the minimum piece here, is to be in the market and to do that work. So here's your options, and then we'll have some discussion. How do I commercialize? Well, you can build a sales force. This is the age-old way that we used to do it. The problem is it is a pretty big investment. 5 to 10 million is probably the minimum. And it's about 90 days for any salesperson that you bring on and you train them in your sales process and you give them the sales tools and off they go. It's 90 days before they're effective at being able to tell your story, surface the need, and then tell your story about how you serve the need. But it's 6 to 12 months before you'll get revenue. So imagine the burn you have with this sales force out there. Why does it take 6 to 12 months for revenue? You have to go through the value committee. And they usually meet once a month, sometimes once a quarter. You have to get to the top that they're actually discussing you, and then they have to approve it, and that takes time. The good thing about it is it gives you the most control. You can have a sales process and make sure they're running it. And it gives you the highest compliance. These are W-2 employees that you can control, make sure they're compliant, make sure they're doing things the right way. So that's one option, most expensive, but most control. Just a couple more and then we'll hit questions. You could rent a sales force. So there are 5 or 6 different companies out there that have W-2 employees, full-time employees. They're going to charge you a 40 to 65% commission because that's how they pay for these W-2 employees. They pay for it on commission. So the commission's usually higher. And the bad side is they're going to have a shared focus. They're probably not going to be able to support that sales professional with just your one product. So what they do is they put similar call points in a bag, different products, similar call points. And then you get shared focus. You get decent control because they are full-time employees, and you get good compliance because they are full-time employees. So this is sort of the second option, rent a sales force. You can go distributors, hire a distributor. So this is a 1099 who has employed 1099s, and it's a 20 to 40% commission on average. It's shared focus, and here's the problem. If your product walks right in, pretty easy to sell, and it is making them a good commission, you'll probably do very well with the distributor. But if it's difficult, if there's no path of least resistance, oftentimes they're not going to put a lot of focus on your product. And this is what people complain about with distributors. You have lower control. People would say questionable compliance. How do you know what this 1099 is doing? And what's your recourse if they're doing something that is a violation of, say, kickback or any type of statute? You could hire free agents. So a free agent's different than a distributor. A distributor is already out there and they got these 1099s. There are plenty of people out there about my age that are experts in a particular market. They're experts at a particular space in medical. And they might be looking for something to do. Maybe they're semi-retired or retired, but they really are strong professionals. If you get that person, you can get full focus. More often, you have someone that has a day job and they're going to moonlight by taking on your product, which may or may not be permissible by who they work for full time. Commissions are negotiable, lower control, questionable compliance. So this was a little bit about the importance of commercialization, what numbers, data you're trying to show the strategic, and then a few options that you have. Let's open it up for some discussion.
Great. So this brings up a lot of subjects and a lot of issues that I think particularly physicians, startup entrepreneurs struggle with. So if you could just back up a minute to the sales slide. Yeah, that one. So this process that you've outlined on the left-hand side, and including marketing, so that one of the things that people struggle with is they really don't understand sales and marketing. And by they, I mean, let's say a physician entrepreneur who's come up with a gadget, and they really have little or no understanding of sales and marketing generally, let alone how the med tech sales and marketing world works. So so maybe you can just, so how do you, if you don't know that, and this gets to the question of, okay, so you're a startup med tech device company, and let's say you're an orthopedic surgeon that came up with this idea, and you say, okay, I want to get this to market. And fundamentally, commercialization is about sales. It's about selling stuff to make money. So one question is, how much money do you have to make? In other words, you're out looking for investors. The investor does all the analysis that you've just outlined in the past 2 weeks, and says, I'm going to give you X amount of money for X percentage of the company, pre-money, post-money value, and I expect a 10 times return in 3 to 5 years. So here's how much you're going to need to sell in annual recurrent revenue to justify an acquisition at Y. I mean, that's the formula. So maybe you can walk us through that. So basically we're saying, what is the objective and key result? The objective is sell a bunch of product. The key performance indicators or the key results are the things that you've listed on the bottom right. So how do you get there? First of all, how do you value the company when you're a startup And okay, what's the expected annual return revenue? In other words, how much do you have to sell? And that's just revenue, that's not profit. And then what's the value of the company if, let's say, for example, you sell $10 million worth of stuff?
Yeah. Okay, so it's a big question, and there's a couple kind of clear paths that I can answer it with. First off, if you go to an investor and you say, hey, the market is this big, and if we can take this percentage of the market, that equals this much revenue. That's one way to think about it. And that's one way that they might value you. Okay, then you're going to argue about how much market share will you actually take? What's it worth? How long will it take you to get that share? That's the classic kind of one way to do it. When we talk about upfront doing the scoring, you do a lot of that scoring with the strategic. It's critical to find out from that strategic, first of all, and then I'll go back to the investor, Dr. Myers. You got to find out from that strategic, what do you need to see? So I'll give you an example. I have a client right now that is in ENT, and talking to those strategics about a device. There's a bunch of exciting things happening in sinuses and nasal cavities. Well, what is there a magic revenue number for them? And there was. For this particular strategic, they said for that particular product, if you could show us a revenue out in the market of 2 to 5 million, that would tell us everything we need to know. But talking to the strategic yesterday in a different space, a vascular space, it wasn't about how much ultimately you can make with your commercialization. It was the numbers that are predictive of what's it going to do in their bag with 100 sales professionals. So these numbers and what the strategic's looking for vary. So if I'm looking at this exit and I'm going to go back to my investor and say, oh, 10x in X amount of time, what I really want to show that investor is, here's our list of potential acquirers. Here's the data points and the measurements that they're going to apply. And if we understand that if we can hit this one, then to them it's worth $100 million. That will generate the return. The older way to do it is, okay, well, we're going to have to be self-sustaining. To be self-sustaining, I need to know my burn rate. I need to know my cost of goods. I need to know exactly how much before I cash flow break even. And in that case, I have to sell that much to break even and then get profit. So what I'm trying to articulate is commercialization, i.e. valuing your company, is best done if you do just enough commercialization to give the strategic the answers they need. And as I outlined, that could sometimes be pretty small revenue. It's more, what does that revenue represent? If you find out that you can be effective and get a doctor approval in X amount of time, the hospital says yes because your costs are good and they have an unmet need, and that happens in a certain amount of time. If you can show them with the revenue you did bring, how it portends or leads them to believe that they're going to have a big accretion putting it in their bag, that's the best. The second, more traditional, just to close that out, is, well, here's my costs. I have to sell at least this to break even and then build profit. So it's really kind of two answers to the question.
So you brought up ENT, and as we mentioned, I'm an ENT surgeon. But the fact is that in the United States, at least, and I think around the world, like 85% of medical devices sold fall into orthopedics and cardiovascular. I mean, those are the two big gorillas in the room. Maybe it's 75% or whatever, but the point is, two specialties represent the large majority of stuff sold in medical device. So if you happen to be in otolaryngology or ENT, which you just alluded to, that's a pretty small market in the big picture of medical device. And so my question then is, how does that alter your strategy? If you're a non-cardiovascular whatever, or orthopedic whatever, but you have an idea and you want to get it to a patient, but you're looking at, the total addressable market is one thing, the serviceable addressable market is another, but the target market is another. And whenever someone says, well, I mean, the total addressable market for this is whatever in China, if we only got 0.1% of that market, well, that's pretty hard and it's pretty unrealistic. So what's the answer? What do you do if you're a minor player in the market?
Understood. Well, the reason that those two parts of medicine are so attractive is it is one of the first and most natural questions of an investor is to say, how big is this market? And we've had plenty of strategics tell us over the years that if your market is less than 500 million, we're not interested. It's too small. Because what are they basically saying? We don't believe it's possible to get a very big share. We believe it's going to be a dogfight and you'll take small increments of share. So the market better be huge for that to pay off for us. So that's just sort of an easy way for people to put you in a bucket and decide yes or no with their investment. A different way to look at it, and I think addresses your question head on, Dr. Myers, is this. You might have a smaller market. Say it's not 500 million, say it's 100 million. But let's say that your idea is so superior to what's out there. It is absolutely possible to get a large piece of a smaller market. So to me, I don't get too excited about how big or small is it. I want to see what the overall score is because the scoring reflects if you are in a small market, these things better be true of your product clinically, cost-wise, technique-wise. So it's really the juxtaposition of take a small piece of a huge market, ortho and vascular, two examples you gave, or be really good at something that's an unmet need in a smaller market, but you're going to take much more share. So to me, they're all in play. You have to have a little bit different way of going about it.
So what you just described, some people describe as a red ocean or a blue ocean strategy. So the red ocean is you're fighting amongst each other and there's blood in the water and you're trying to take market share from somebody else, versus a blue ocean, which is essentially creating a new product category, like a minimal viable category of a product. And back in the day, the classic example was cardiac stents or intravascular techniques. Now we're talking several years ago, but they weren't there before they were invented. So this or endoscopy created a totally new product category. So if you're in this position and you're saying, well, gee, I don't have what it takes to go up against Smith and Nephew or Synthes or Zimmer or Medtronic or whatever. I'm trying to create a totally new, for lack of a better term, minimally viable category. So what are the pros and cons of doing that? Is that a viable strategy?
Gotcha. Well, let's look at a few places that it's happened, and I lived a few of these, so I can tell you what the pros and cons are. Let's take a look at the first atherectomy device. Let's don't balloon it. Let's don't stent it. Let's remove the plaque. New category. Let's talk about your specialty, Dr. Myers. Let's talk about bringing angioplasty or balloons into the sinuses or into the nasal cavity, or in stents even. So when that happens, the good news is you can create this new market. You can be really highly valued for doing so. Look at penumbra, for example. Let's aspirate the clot from the M1 artery, the middle cerebral artery. When that happens, you have a chance to get very large values because it's new and you're going to take over this market. So the upside is that you can be really have a high value, a rich value with not a ton of revenue because it's a new space and emotional money goes towards that's where we should go. That's where I'm going to invest because it's new and it's going to grow. The downsides are there might not be codes that adequately reimburse the new widget or the new idea or the new category. So reimbursement and codes is going to be a challenge. If you look at your specialty, I can do these balloons and stents now, but can I get paid to do it in my office? Well, yes and no. The codes don't make it real attractive to do that yet, but you have to work towards it. So I would say the upside is you can get very nice values, very nice exits without a ton of revenue. You can also be a first leader for years, be the best at whatever that is that you invented, so you can get longevity, higher values. The downside is usually reimbursement and then adoption for people that grew up like you did. Hey, if I'm going to do this surgery, I do step 1, 2, 3, then I do A, B, C, and I get a good result. So another downside of this new one is changing somebody's habits. It's different than they were trained. It's different than what they have confidence in. So pros and cons for sure. And that's, again, one more pitch for the scoring. This has to be taken into consideration.
What about the difference between being the first to market versus a fast follower?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, historically, the fast follower is where you do want to be, because you get to have someone else blaze some of these reimbursement issues, blaze some of the coding issues, blaze some of the insurance companies saying yes or saying it's investigational, so no. I think it's great to have someone go and show you that part of the landscape. Plus, always when you look at someone who was first mover, there's room for improvement. There's going to be things it does well. That's how they created the new category. But man, there's going to be improvement. So I think that they're both good. They're just different.
And what are your tips about what's being referred to these days as your innovation? It used to be a go-to-market strategy. Now it's being referred to as an innovation to market strategy. So what are your top tips and big mistakes? You're muted.
Sorry, how would you characterize those two differences, Dr. Myers? I'm not 100% clear how you look at it.
Well, it's actually a glitzy word. It's another shiny new object, but the point is they're trying to make innovation like the buzzword. It's essentially a go-to-market strategy. So the difference is this another Me Too product? And maybe in a sense we just discussed it, or is this something that's really very, very much different and truly, quote, innovative, although that term has been overworked, as we both know. So let's say you really do have something that is different and hasn't been done, or it's been done, but you still have to sort of prove its value. And let's take the balloon, the sinus ostium balloon.
Mm-hmm.
When that first came out, as you alluded to, one of the hurdles was, does it work? And prove to me that this is as good as endoscopic sinus surgery, that we can do it in the office, we can do it under local anesthesia, that it's applicable to all different kinds of osteal obstruction, that it's not going to restenose, that it's not going to cause complications, blah, that we're going to get paid as much to do it as we were being paid for endoscopic sinus surgery. I mean, the list is endless, as you alluded to. So when they went to market, they were faced with the issues that you're alluding to. And that happened maybe 10 years ago. I mean, it was a while ago, and people are still debating, does it work? And is this something that I want to include in my clinical armamentarium? So that's one example. So taking that example, what are the mistakes? I mean, how do you get over that other than just keep pounding out articles and getting key opinion leaders to say this thing works?
Yeah, well, there's a few scores in the scoring that are just for this. And here's how you get over it. If you're in a space, let's say you're talking about the superficial femoral. We've been ballooning and stenting that for a couple decades. If you're going to come out with something in that space, there is one answer and one answer only: clinical superiority, proven with a randomized trial. So you have to answer the question in a case like that. If it's something that you're bringing out, let's talk about like the ENT, and it's coming new, well, the first thing that has to be going for you is there has to be enough data to say it's at least as good or close to it as good. And there better be reimbursement or time-saving reasons for the doctor to change. So you either have to drive with clinical data that is irrefutable, or you can make good progress if the doctor gets more time, gets better, more fair reimbursement. Those are the answers. Otherwise, people will just do what they do right now.
Yeah. Sujit, welcome back. You have a question.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yep.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm not on video today. A little bit of chaos going on in the house. Hey, first of all, this is a great presentation. I did have one question. What was that statistic of 85% around? Are you saying like 85% of the ideas get patented but never get commercialized?
Sorry. That's probably pretty close to true too. If you look at how many 510K clearances are granted every year, and then you look at what actually makes it on the product, it's probably worse than the number I showed. The number I showed was directly from Silicon Valley Bank, where they were talking about how many products, medical device products, get a 510K clearance, and then a strategic picks them up. It's only 15% and dropping. It's 85% where they're sitting back and they're going to say, prove to me in the market that I should be interested in this. And let me explain
Okay.
why real quick, Sujit. So
Yeah.
if you're that strategic and, I did that job, so here's how we would talk about it. It would be like this. Okay, we're going to have to go to somebody, either the CEO, or maybe we're going to have to go to a division lead, and we're going to have to say, hey, we should buy this particular startup medical device. Great. Why do you want to do it? Oh, it's this much better. The doctor's like, blah, blah. Nobody cares. Here's what they're going to ask. They're going to ask, what is going to be the acquisition price? Is it going to move our earnings per share? Is it going to move our stock price at all?
Right.
Then they're going to ask, like we were talking about earlier, how much of the market do you really think you can get, and how accretive is it? So then they're going to compare that, whatever those numbers are, they're going to compare it to what they're already doing. And if this growth rate that your new company that they're going to buy your product, if your growth rate, if it doesn't drive a growth rate higher than what they're already growing at, the answer is going to be no. And so nobody wants to guess at these numbers, because when you're telling the CEO or you're vying with other divisions to get investment to buy a company, you have to show all of these factors are going to lift, and they're going to lift faster and better than if you did nothing.
Got it. So the bar is really high to get acquired is my key takeaway here. Like, it's really tough to get acquired. Like, it's not just I have a better technology, I have a better procedure. It's that overall impact on the entire organization's division or the business. And that's what's going to sway the decision, not just the core technology or the core clinical benefit itself. Like, that's my takeaway, I guess.
100%.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Wow.
Sure.
Okay. This is, yeah.
So another way of saying that is the CFO is going to look at this and say, pre-acquisition, post-acquisition, how does this move the return on equity needle?
Yeah.
And everything you said, Sujit, was dead on the money. There are multiple variables that in my experience, most clinicians, I said it at the first session, I rarely, and I mean rarely, have had a doctor or an inventor come to me and say, what do you think of this? I rarely have looked at it and said, we don't need that. Almost always, if I was the patient, I would want that. But the factors that go into an acquisition are so many that have nothing to do with the clinical. Remember, we were talking in the first session, 217 scoring points. There's only like 25 or 26 that have anything to do with the clinical. The rest of them are all the other stuff that has to line up to have it be successful and get it to patients.
Yeah.
So
No,
that brings up.
that's.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
That
I
brings
said
up-
that was a really good explanation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Sure. Thanks for your question. Before we get on to the exit part, let me ask one final question, and that is, so you're the inventor, doctor, whatever, and you're looking for a CEO, and because you're probably not the right person to be the CEO to get this thing across the goal line in most instances. Not always, but in many instances, the clinical person that came up with the need and maybe the development of the solution is rarely the person that has the knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies to grow and scale a medical device company. So you go out and you try to find somebody who is, and it could be at the very beginning, or it could be later on in the process. So what do you need in a CEO?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly. I'm picturing right now the scoring section for the leadership team. And when it comes to the CEO, there's you can score a 10, a 7, a 4, or a 1. And here's some of the differences between a 10 and a 1. So let's start with the 10, because that's more fun. The 10 is that this person is a known successful player in the space your device fits into. Success defined as they have no problem raising the money, because their track record will bring investors. They have no problem attracting the right people, because their track record attracts the right people. So a 10 is somebody that has had exits in your space. A 10 is somebody that can bring the investors, not with a bunch of pitch decks and a bunch of due diligence. They'll bring the investors because you got this person, Dr. Myers, for example, saying, oh no, this is the next one I'm doing. Let's go. So you got to be able to bring the money. You have to be able to attract the right team. And you have to, these days, I believe, be pretty darn good at executing or project management. Why? Because if you are doing this with outsourcing, somebody has to be able to evaluate and pick the right partners and then manage it. So this is a little bit different than having the bricks and mortar and I hire a COO to do that. Many times the CEO is wearing different hats. Most important is the fundraising. Second most important is access to and attract the right people. And then I think now there's a new element where you're managing these fractional partners.
Great. Let's move on to the final segment, which is the exit. So what are the issues?
Okay, so this is part 6 of 6, a little bittersweet. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you again for the opportunity to share here, Dr. Myers, over the last 3 weeks. Let's talk about the exit. So the exit, if you worked the process that we talked about, you scored it, the scoring told you what the device has to do, its cogs, how it works, everything. If you worked it, you're not guessing about your exit. You already pre-picked who's the likely acquirer. And it's great if you have 4 to 5, 6 of those. You've already gone to them to find out what has to be true here. What commercial data are you going to need to make your decisions and have it de-risked? So if you work that process, you're not guessing about what it takes to exit. Do you know how many times people come over and they want help and they're all set to commercialize? They want to exit, but they don't even know if there's a strategic that has an interest. They never checked. They just assumed if they made a better device that there would be plenty of interest, but it's not always the case. So if you work the process, you're not guessing about strategic interest. You're not guessing about what that potential acquirer is going to need to say yes and give you the right value. You're not guessing about that. You're not guessing about if you're going to ultimately exit or not. And you're not guessing about how is a strategic going to value my company. If you didn't work the process, stop everything and work it now. Because if you don't know these 4 bullets up top, if you don't know, look, do they already have a product like yours being developed organically? They might. And if they are, is that part of their 5-year revenue plan? So when I ran a division, I was responsible to corporate for a certain P&L. And I had to have a reason. I had to have like a plan to deliver X amount of revenue, right? And so what were my choices? Well, I can sell more of what I already sell. I can organically develop in-house new products, or I can acquire something. So it's really important for the exit to have an idea from the beginning. But if you don't, go and get it now. What are the strategics? What is their interest? How are they going to make their decisions? What do they need to see? What's in their 5-year plan? If you know these things, then your development goes so much smoother because you're not guessing. So to me, the exit is all about you do these bullets up front and you find out. If you didn't do something like that, go back and rescore it. It will tell you what has to be true of your cogs, what has to be true of your data, what has to, right? You just go back and start again. Fill in your deltas. The scoring is going to show you where you're not going to attract the strategic. You're not going to exit. Or worse, maybe worse, you'll exit, but you gave it away. So I think that the exit is all about this slide right here. And you're probably sick of hearing about scoring, but man, it's critical. All right, types of exits. Oh,
so this sounds like the Stephen Covey start with the end in mind and work backwards.
It's just like that. It's 100% like that.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments about what I've said so far on the exit?
Well, why don't we finish this segment, and then I'll ask you another question. Okay,
great. So here's the types of exits. So initial public offering. Some close friends from prior startups have recently done an IPO who was wildly successful, and that's still an option. By the way, in talking with those gentlemen before they went public, well before, hey, what's your plan? Do you plan to be acquired? Oh, no, we're going public. I was like, wow. My last startup, we were at a board meeting with Dr. Nelson, who's since passed. He was vice chair at Medtronic, ton of startups, famous, great guy. And we're in a board meeting asking ourselves the same question. What's the exit? He goes, we're going public. So it can be done. And it's definitely an option. So you can go public, in which case to exit, you got to get public, get enough float in your stock that you as the inventor or operator of this company can liquidate without people saying something's wrong and you're dumping your stock. So it's just because you got public and you got good movement in your stock. I like to pre-build in when I do these automatic triggers for stock sales, because otherwise it looks bad. You follow?
Yeah.
You can't be like dumping it. So that's an option. Then you liquidate. You can get acquired, as we've been talking about a lot. I've seen offers for full cash, full asking amount, 40 million right here, full cash. I've seen others where it's like, hey, we think you're worth 40, but we're going to give you 10. And then if you hit these milestones, might be further development, might be sales numbers, then you start to get more of the 40 million that we're using as an example here. And then of course there's licensing. Well, we're really interested. We think it would do good in our sales bag, but we're not willing to give you any upfront money or commitments, but we will give you a percentage of all the sales. So these are just some types of exits that we see all the time. But exiting is a big topic. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I'm just sharing with you my experience over the last 20 some years. So let's have some discussion. I'll stop sharing. And
so all the buzz now is about SPACs, special purpose acquisition corporation, sort of like a reverse merger or a blank check. And we're hearing a lot of buzz about that, but now we're sort of falling into the trough of disillusionment. And the prices of SPACs are dropping, and Wall Street's getting nervous, and the SEC is snooping around. And any views on that?
You know, I don't have a bunch of experience with that. I do have a dear friend out of Stanford that has started a SPAC, and it's a digital SPAC. And this guy has got, I mean, I'm honored that, you know, he'll talk to me on the phone. I mean, he's that accomplished. So what people do there is they go, oh my gosh, if it's coming from that location with that person and it's in this hot space, I'll trust them to make the right picks. But I still think it's trying to give yourself like this, you don't really decide, you let someone else decide. I kind of don't get it.
Well, some would argue that as the balloon gets bigger, that's when you get out.
Yeah, I don't know how that's all going to play out, but you just made me think of the tulip bubble that they had.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And of course, there's a lot of issues with going public. I mean, that is a major commitment and a major headache. All the regulatory issues and all the filing requirements and the amount of money, and let alone where do you go public? And so that's another issue. So let's say, for example, you decide, yeah, I want to go public. Well, there are many, many markets in the world where maybe it's a better idea. For example, the Australian Stock Exchange. For example, the mid-level market in the UK. For example, the Hong Kong stock. I mean, they're all over the place, let alone Pink Sheets, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, American. So any advice on, I mean, other than hire an investment banker who knows what the heck they're talking about, what's your advice?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll never forget that we were nearing the opportunity to become public at my last startup. And I'll never forget the CEO who had started and turned like 3 different companies already. Remember that guy would score a 10, right, on your CEO when we score. Right. And I remember he said, you guys are getting excited about being public. You're gonna rue the day that we went public. And we're like, what are you talking about? We're gonna be officers in a public company. This is like good for us all across the board. And boy, was he right. Boy, was he right. You know, everything from the logistics of it, you know, your earnings calls, you know, talking to all the analysts, pre-call, post-call, there's a bunch of that stuff, no doubt. But boy, did it change the constitution of the board and then what we were being held to. And you want to talk about, in my opinion, one person's opinion, I only know what I know. It's probably not a lot. But boy, were the short-term decisions ratcheting up. It became all about that number and all about that earnings call. And we had, I'll never forget, we had one great idea about where our product would also play. And it meant life or death to patients on dialysis, by the way. And we couldn't do it because we were afraid it would be too dilutive to our focus. So there's pros and cons of it. There's no doubt. Only advice I would say is similar to my advice about scoring or commercializing or developing. I would not go it alone. If I am not positive what I'm doing and what are the things to look out for and what has to be true, if I wasn't as sure as the day is long, I would get help. Because even when you are sure, there are things that are timing related, luck related. It's still like hard enough, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But boy, stuff
Yeah.
like this, I just wouldn't guess.
Another challenge of whether you go public or not is how do you scale the culture? Because most people get into these things because it's fun, it's exciting, it trips a trigger. They just like the action, the startup action. But once you start growing, then it's really hard to sustain that fun startup, exciting culture because now you're in corporate land. So what advice would you give people? How do you do that?
Well, if you really think from the beginning, kind of goes back to what your exit was or the Covey, end in mind. While you're building the startup, if you're really thinking that ultimately this thing is going to go, our scores show this has a chance to go public. Well, every hire you make, you should have in mind, are they going to be a fit going forward? This is a small piece of the advice, but it's real. So I would try to bring people like that are not going to be a total misfit. If I could, that's the first thing I wanted to say. But when this happens, one of the first things that you'll notice in the sales force is you'll have massive turnover, because now you're going to have a guy that, because of who he or she knows in a particular city, who moves the needle in that particular cath lab or ENT surgery suite, you have these people, we call them cowboys. They know this person, and for whatever reason, we don't know, they can bring that conversion and they can do it quick. Those people want to be paid a lot because they're basically leveraging off, here's what I can bring to you today. And it's very attractive because the company needs that revenue. They need to show that adoption. Well, what you'll find is you pretty quickly lose that salesperson for either one of two reasons. They don't want someone managing them. They don't want someone holding them to a number or a sales process, or they don't want to be held to compliance. Now you got someone looking around saying, is it inducement? Are you marketing something off label? Like, what's going on here? So in every startup I've been in, when you go public, it's not just the other things we mentioned. Don't forget there's plenty good here, but the things that can go like difficult is your people are just totally different. People that were all about the excitement, like you said, and a chance to make a bunch of money early and get stock and have an equity swing at the plate. It's just a different animal than someone who's like, okay, tell me what my number is for the quarter and then badger me every Friday about hitting my number. They're just different animals. The best you can do is try to plan for it in your hiring as you go. Maybe the most important thing is how you respond when the characteristics of the early hires no longer match the characteristics of success going forward. How you handle that is very important. And there's a lot, that's a whole nother discussion, but it can be done. But in my experience, it's at least a 30–40% turn from the people that were there at the beginning.
Yeah. Sujit, you live in corporate world. So what's your view from inside?
So I don't have a lot of experience working on acquisitions. However, I do know, to Brian's earlier point, there is a group, it's a very small group, and rightly so. They don't want too many people involved in the due diligence phase. They go through a pretty systematic checklist or a process. I'm not privy to that checklist. Nobody is, unless you're working on something specific. And unfortunately, I've never had a chance to work on an acquisition. But yeah, that point resonates, where a lot of factors have to be check before we say this is even worthy of acquisition consideration. The things that I have got involved in are having made the decision to acquire a company, to integrate their quality system, to integrate their drawings, to integrate their team members. And we always, on the engineering side, end up wondering, why are we even doing this, right? Like, because even when all the smart people in the company have said this is a very, very beneficial acquisition, business wise, all aspects considering, when we start actually doing the work of integrating the quality systems, or really start doing the nitty-gritty engineering, we end up saying, boy, this is a mess, right? And usually those acquisition integration projects can last for 12 months, 15 months, 18 months.
Right.
They start off with a lot of energy, and in the end, people start to like, oh my God, I would rather work on our own product. Like there's still like sometimes that sense of it's
Right.
us versus them versus, hey, it's not us versus them. It's all us now. They're us,
Yeah.
right? So I,
that kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, it's like I've been on like a couple of those teams, and usually they become all consuming because there is a lot of pressure. Again, to Brian's point, is once the acquisition is made, the business almost expects the switch to turn on the next day. And from a quality side, we might say, hang on, this is not actually ready for prime time yet. There's a long way here, guys. We could be 12 to 15 months away from actually releasing this under our quality system. And that is,
Sujit, you know what's so interesting about that? So we talked about in the development, if you're picking these partners, and we talked about one of the incubators that I've worked with pretty extensively, quality system is rock solid, manufacturability, all done. So we talked about how important that was. It's fascinating for me to hear an engineering perspective of why did we buy this? Because I can tell you on the commercial side, I went through this at J&J, they made an acquisition, and it was the exact same thing at Medtronic when they made an acquisition. We're all wondering who's on that team because we can't sell this, or it doesn't match our call point. One classic example, just to show you how crazy it can get, is it was a urology division. And we had already the product that we were working with was for people that work mainly with female patients. So urologist, but a female focus. So then they bought a product that was for urology, but it was for the prostate. So yeah, I'm in the same office, but it was so divergent that we're all looking at it going, anyway, it's interesting for me to hear from your perspective that you might be saying, why did we do it? So I think that strategics have really learned, and that's why now very few of these exit until you're in the market and all this stuff is proven.
Yeah, and I think where we've gotten better, just to build on that, is, initially it used to be like there's this really senior team working on a certain acquisition, and there's probably a very, very senior level director or a manager. But to tell you the truth, they're almost better off involving the day-to-day engineers, because it is at our level, we understand the language of the organization, quality system wise, test methods, whatever. I'm getting into the details here, but so they've started involving us a little bit more, so we can actually look at their SOPs, their work instructions, their quality system structure, and say, how does it compare, right? And I think one thing we have also gotten better at is we can't expect an acquisition company to have the same level of rigor as us, because we are like this big fish, right? So we're supposed to have everything versus, so there's some flexibility in thinking that's required from our side as well. And we at Boston Scientific has grown through acquisitions, as I think both of you might know, right? So we're still not there, I think, where we could be in terms of how smoothly we can do things there.
Yeah, you know what, you're kind of
I'm not sharing anything proprietary. I'm just sharing some experience.
No, Sujit, actually, you're really taking us back to the first step of the scoring, where we said it's not like it's rocket science. It's not like we're going to say something in this series that no one ever thought of.
Yeah.
What you really summarized well there for me, and I think it edifies the whole point of this series, is you can't leave these stones unturned. You can't discover a problem later. You have to literally go through and get that checkbox from engineering, from manufacturing, from quality system, from commercial, from the financial. Like, it all factors into whether or not you're going to be successful. So to me, I also have noticed that there's no two strategics that are the same, that are making decisions on for the same reasons, or they change how they're making decisions over time. So going back to the Covey reference from Hector Myers, man, don't guess. Just go find out. It's doable.
I wonder also if the risk appetite is different at the strategic based on the division they might be in. If some certain division might be, lagging compared to, say, other divisions in the company, and I don't know, there might be some subtle pressure on the president of that division to show some movement, show some, growth. And they might be, hey, here's an acquisition, it's not ready, but hey, in 2 years' time, this could be a nice turnaround for us. And so you might go ahead, even though at the bottom of your eye, you might know, like, this is going to be like a This could go
brings
the
up,
other way too, you know?
Yeah, this is a
So,
classic conflict between finance, engineering, and marketing.
yeah,
And it works both ways. The marketing people and, well, the finance people, earnings per share. Marketing people, sell, sell, sell. Engineering people, not ready yet. We want to put more bells and whistles on it. And it's this constant back and forth
this
and trying
tension,
to
yeah.
figure it out. So,
Uh,
but that's
In
kind of, it's part of the deal.
Yeah, marketing is usually very optimistic, is my
Sure.
experience. And
That's what they get paid to do.
yeah,
Tell a story. Yeah.
We're built that
Right.
way.
Anyway. All right. So I have one final question, and that is because we only have a couple minutes left. A lot of people have been talking about how private equity is impacting medicine, whether it's acquiring practices, whether it's getting involved in deals, whether it's rolling up and fixing and flipping. From your perspective to medical device exits, what have you seen or what do you think is the impact of private equity? Because a lot of
Well,
companies now are staying private. It's just, despite what you said, that is the IPO route. More and more companies are growing and staying private rather than going IPO for a number of reasons.
yeah, I don't
So
have.
what is your take on all that?
Yeah, well, obviously it's a huge, huge topic. I will tell you what I've seen, recently. This idea of people being able to make money off medicine, and even in dental, it happened, right? People are buying up practices and then they hire the doctor as an employee or the dentist as an employee. I mean, I don't know where it's going. We just saw in the vascular space a huge acquisition of Cordis, where it's going to be brought in and it's going to be run and, improve. I don't know where it's going. My own take on it is, if I had the choice of being public or private, I would stay private for sure, and I would try to keep command of my own destiny. But there's just so many variables. I don't really have a comment beyond that, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, and just as a final point, the medical education establishment is worried about this because training medical students and residents to go into a world of private equity as an employee is having a lot of impact on a bunch of things. And they're just trying to get their arms around this. So it's an important topic and something that we'll see play out in the future. Well, anyway, unfortunately, we've run out of time. These 3 weeks have flown by. I really appreciate all the insight and collaboration and participation. Sujit, thanks for your comments.
yep, love
If
this.
if you had not been able to, as I said, to see two previous ones, we encourage you to subscribe to the SOAP video channel on YouTube. And we hope we've found this valuable. Brian, thanks again for all your expertise and insights. And we'll see you on the next episode of SOAP Video. So stay safe and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
I was in a meeting, Iravati.